All right, good morning everyone. I think we can start and welcome to our event on assessing the environmental and social impacts of batteries. How far can we go? My name is Vasilios Rizos. In case you don't know me, I'm head of Sustainable Resources and Circular Economy here at SEPS. Very briefly, some introductory words from my side. I mean, if you are in this debate around batteries, I think you know already that we have a new batteries regulation in the EU, which will introduce for the first time a robust, concrete framework for measuring the carbon footprint of batteries, with gradually tightening requirements in the coming years. So this is, from as far as we're concerned, the first of its kind framework globally, and it will start, of course, with a carbon footprint declaration that all batteries that will be entering the European market will need to have in the future, and gradually these rules will lead to a carbon footprint threshold that will basically determine the access of batteries in the European market. Now, there is, as you can imagine, such requirements, and there is, of course, a whole section also on social requirements and due diligence in the batteries regulation. As you can imagine, these new requirements will create new demands for data sharing, data collection across supply chains. According to some people, they will shake global supply chains because, of course, the battery supply chains are of global nature. And basically, there are a lot of things that people expect to see in the coming years, and we thought maybe it's a good time to have such an event and really bring together an excellent panel, I would say, of speakers from research, industry, NGOs as well, and really discuss the current state of play in assessing the environmental and social impact of batteries, but also discuss policy implications and what action we would need to see from policymakers in the coming years. So some of the questions we would like to address today is first of all, where do we stand with calculation of these aspects? I mean, what methodologies we have in place? I mean, how do industry players feel about this? Of course, what do different stakeholders think about the carbon footprint, the requirements of the batteries regulation, and the social requirements as well? And of course, what challenges, what messages can we see from existing pilots and practical examples of people who try to already, measure the carbon footprint and meet the requirements of the regulation? Two important things I would like to emphasize. First of all, this event is organized in the context of the BATRO EU-funded project that develops circular economy pilots for lithium-ion batteries in the EU. There's a banner there on the entrance where you can see all the list of partners at the bottom. And of course, you can click batro.eu to find out more information. There will be also a short presentation afterwards. So yes, please stay tuned to see what this project aims to achieve. And secondly, on the occasion of this event, we would like to publish today, actually, the second policy paper we did in the context of this project on compliance with the EU carbon footprint requirements for electric vehicle batteries, an overview of challenges. You can see already on the screen the cover of the paper. Now, what we try to do this paper is really to list the challenges we see in meeting the carbon footprint requirements of the regulation as they have been observed in BATRO, but also by stakeholders and experts in the value chain. So we hope this is an interesting read. We have some physical copies. Maybe some of you got already one, but of course the paper can be downloaded from our website, and I guess it will be also available on the BATRO website as well. Now, just a few words about the flow of the program. We will start with a short introduction of the project, and then we have, as I said earlier, 5 panelists that will give a short presentations, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion. We finish at 12. There will be lunch, networking lunch in the green room downstairs. The event will be recorded, by the way, and will be available on YouTube later. I mean, if you don't have anything better to do in your evenings, you can go back to the recording, or if you miss any important message. All right, so with no further delay, I think I can invite Angel Escamilla Perez, who from LEITA Technology Center. LEITA is coordinating the BATRO project, and I think Angel will give us an overview, very short overview of the project and where do we stand today.
Okay, well, thank you, Vasilios, for the presentation. So I'm Angel Escamilla from LEITA Technological Center, and we are coordinating the BATRO project. So maybe we can show the few slides I prepared. Yeah, thank you very much. So BATRO project is an European, for the European project, and we are focusing on maybe the next slide, please. On the objective of the project is the creation of 2 pilot plants focused on all the value chain of the recycling of EV batteries. So the first pilot plant will be focused on the semi-automatic disassembly of battery packs into modules. Then those modules can be reused in a second life application, used also for repairing other battery packs. And the modules that are not suitable for those options, they go to the recycling step. So they will pass to the second pilot plant that is focused on the hydrometallurgical treatment. Thank you very much. Um, and this second pilot plant will contain two separate steps. One focused on the mechanical pretreatment and the activation, and the second one following the hydrometallurgical process to obtain the new or the recycled precursors for cathode active materials. Here in the slide you can see the different interaction between all the partners, and an important thing to mention is that we are also developing and working on the life cycle assessment of the process in order to evaluate the difference between the actual process, the industrial process, and what we are proposing in this project. And just a quick last slide. This is the battery timing. We are currently at month 22. We have a lot of work already performed, and there are some of the highlights obtained up to now. So during the project, we are creating also a battery passport for the transparency and following the different materials and process for these batteries. A prototype for the second line application, the manual disassembly. The tools that are developed for the first pilot for the semi-automatic dismantling. And the last are the picture of the second pilot and, well, last one of the common CAM material developed here in the project. So thank you very much for your attention. I give the word to Vasilios. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Angel. Is there any, I don't know, immediate question about Batro, what we're doing, the scope of the project? Something, any point of clarification? Okay. Not at this stage. All right, so I think we can move on to the panel discussion. So I'm going to first introduce the panels. I'm going to go in order. We will start with Fabrice Mathieu, who is researcher at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Fabrice will first provide an overview of what the Joint Research Center is doing in the domain of circularity, batteries, and critical raw materials. We will continue with Raji Kaur, who is sustainability manager at Recharge. Recharge represents the lithium battery manufacturing industry. Raj can explain a little bit more later about the association, and of course she will present her views on the legislative developments we are seeing in the batteries domain and on carbon footprint specifically. Then we move a bit further downstream, and we will host Karol Bentarek from VDA, the German automotive industry. Karol will present, of course, the views of the industry on the color on the batteries regulation, and hopefully he can also provide us some insights about how do they think the market responding and the industry responding to these upcoming requirements. Then we move on to get a little bit more of a research perspective, and we have with us Maeva Lavin-Filippo, who is a senior researcher at the Electromobility Research Center of VUB here in Brussels. Maeva, she's doing research on LCA and sustainability, and she will be able to present views from similar projects to Batro on EU-funded projects on batteries. And we will conclude the round of panelists with Emily Ritchie, who is policy manager, supply chains at Transport and Environment, perhaps the largest NGO in Brussels working on transportation. And Emily will present her views on the due diligence requirements, and hopefully we'll be able to enrich a bit the discussions with the social aspects as well. Good. Well, all speakers will have 10 minutes for the initial introduction, and I think, we can already go ahead to have a good time for discussion, and I give the floor to Fabrice. So Fabrice, thanks for being with us today, and I think we look forward to hear about your work.
This one, okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Vasilios, and thank you to Batro for inviting us here in this presentation. So I just took the title of of the meeting, and I just added a GSE perspective. We'll give our insight on that based on the recent work we have. So first of all, what is a GSE? You see here the three keywords of our activity: anticipate, integrate, impact. We are lucky people to be working supporting policy but not doing policy, so we are providing the scientific and technical support for policies, and we are of course in contact every day, if not more, every hour with our colleagues in Brussels. However, we are not based in Brussels, so you see here the mission of the GSE is to provide science and knowledge to the colleagues. We are actually distributed in 5 member states. Personally, I'm based in Italy, in Ispra on the Lago Maggiore, and we are actually research staff. As you see here, a lot of people have got a PhD, and we are still publishing scientific papers, but our work is really to support policy. You can see the view of the center, and you can see that I work at the Sustainable Resource Directorate, where you can see the mission. And besides other activities on sustainable resources, we support raw materials, circular economy, life cycle assessment, and sustainable development goals. So I will give you a feedback of the work of the GSE on the regulation, the 2023 regulation. I will speak about entry market requirements. I will speak about carbon footprint, because you all wait for this. Also, I'm not working for policy, so don't ask me about timing on the delegated act, please. And I will speak a bit on circularity. So why life cycle thinking is important for batteries? I think we all agree that batteries are important technologies for the transition. There is a strong impact shift between stages of the life cycle and between impact. We don't anymore emit CO2 during use phase, but we extract some materials at the extraction phase. And there is definitely a need to apply the life cycle thinking to make sure that we apply to demonstrate the sustainability perspective. And what is very important with this regulation, and that now it's a game changer, because it's about entry market requirements, about carbon footprint, about recycled content, and about a few other things on safety as well and on performance. So that's quite a game changer. It's not anymore just a declaration. So as you know, the GSE has been supporting the preparation of the implementation of the battery regulation. We are working across all directorates. In Ispra in blue, as you see, the PET and the colleagues who have a laboratory lab in the Netherlands, and colleagues in Seville in Spain, and we are pairing and pooling resource on that. You see here where we are supporting. We don't support all the life cycle, but we are supporting very much on the topic that I mentioned, carbon footprint and circularity. But also performance and safety. So I will do a focus only on carbon footprint and on circularity today, just to give you some updates. So you probably know the methodological framework that we have contributed to. So we have published last year our recommendation on the calculation for the carbon footprint for the EV batteries. As we all know, it's still under discussion to be transformed into delegated act. Don't ask me the details. We are not aware of the details, not much more than you are, and on the timing either. Still, we are now developing the methods for the industrial batteries. We are running some workshops, and a report is being prepared and should be out soon. And we plan to work in 26-27 on the same rules for light mean of transport batteries, and it's also planned to work on external storage batteries much later. And we had, of course, built our work on literature, on our scientific knowledge, but we have also interacted a lot with stakeholders, many of you during various stakeholder meetings. You probably know the GSE proposal, which is, you can see the link here. You will have the slide, so you'll be able to click on the link, but you probably know them. The draft delegated act was on, as you say, there are some discussions going on with the new commission, and the decision will be taken soon. And there is a report being developed for industrial batteries. You will have access to it as well. And then we'll start very soon the work, not only so on the methods, but not on calculation and on identifying some classes, some assessment of performances and deriving some classes. It will start very soon. And of course, data will be very much needed in this. That's quite relevant for this workshop. Yeah, that's what I said. You can see here the report. You have the QR code to access to the report. And as we said, we have developed the methodology for EV, industrial, soon LMD and flow batteries. And the objective is to propose a methodology, the best available methodology according to GSE findings, to also take into account the input from stakeholders, and soon we'll start the work on the classes and the threshold. Sorry for the graph, very techy and very detailed, but it's just to show you that in our proposal, of course, there are different levels of data quality or source of data. We are asking to have primary data for the manufacturing stage of the batteries, so that the manufacturers can make the difference and showing their best performances, while we also acknowledge the possibility to use secondary data for other parts in the value chain, including extraction and transport. But as much as data that is primary data is, of course, welcome to improve the quality of the assessment. That was it for the carbon footprint, but you probably knew about it already. Now some news, quite news, yes, because 2024 fall was quite a rich vintage for our work on circularity of batteries. We have actually worked on collection, on transport of waste, and on recycling. So we have developed a methodology on available for collection. So that's to target the portable batteries and the LMT batteries, which are not always well collected. So we have worked in support of the environment on we have worked on the put on the market data and on the lifetime distribution of all these products. And we have derived a method to be able to put some collection rate on the available for collection methods. So the objective is to have appropriate targets, so still very ambitious, but appropriate, because if they take into account the lifetime, the real lifetime, I mean, as much real as possible lifetime of products in use. You have already the link, but the link is not working because the report will be launched tomorrow. This is a raw material week, so tomorrow we have a big, in principle, big launch of report. It should work tomorrow early morning, hopefully. You'll have the slides again. The second work that we're publishing tomorrow is about the next step. It's about recycling. So we have been working the same way on the Article 71 on recycling efficiency targets. And we have made a proposal on how to calculate recycling efficiency and material recovery levels. The report will be also published tomorrow. And the feature there is, of course, we have a strong focus on how to recover critical materials in the batteries, lithium, cobalt, nickel, and etc. And we try to promote as much as possible, or to take into account the new recycling processes, for example, for lithium. And we are trying also to propose measures which are also fit for purpose for allowing future innovation. And I'm thinking of possible innovation to recover the graphite in the future. So coming up tomorrow, looking forward to your feedback on that. And we have actually already published, colleagues from Sevilla have already published this fall a proposal on the GSC, on the waste code for batteries, to allow some movement of the batteries to facilitate their recovery, with a specific focus on the market evolutions of batteries and how to manage hazardous properties. So in principle, all of that gives a GSC, some proposals of the GSC for the circularity assessment in the battery regulation. I will stop here very soon. Just to say a few words, just to illustrate a bit more. Do we have more? 3 minutes? Okay. Just to give a bit more flavor, the report that is launched tomorrow is about collection. You know that we have ambitious targets on portable batteries and light means of transport by 27 and 28, 30, 31. And the targets are there, don't work if we use the current approach of put on the market plus 3 years of lifetime. So we need to integrate the lifetime of e-bikes, of e-scooters, etc. So that is the content of the report being published tomorrow. And of course, we'll need data also on the lifetime of batteries. So that's quite related to the topic of today, of the project. And again, the other report on the support to Article 71 is we have proposed our approach on how to calculate recycling efficiency, which process to use, hydrometallurgy, pyrometallurgy, etc., and when can a material be considered as recycled and therefore integrated into the calculation. With a specific focus again on lithium and other critical materials, and again big challenge on the data and on the composition of the battery which are recovered. So probably linked to the activity of the project. More coming up tomorrow. Just to finalize, we are also trying to maintain the knowledge base of the GRC. First of all, we have our raw material information system platform where you can find a lot of information on data on raw materials, on critical materials, including on circularity. And we have also developed an application on battery stocks and flows that you can use and use following the link that you see on the screen. And quite important for this community, we have also the European platform on LCA developed also in our unit. You can go there, find all the package and data on the LCA and product environmental footprint methodology. And I encourage you also to think on, yes, when we speak about accessibility and quality of data, lifecycle data, which will be very important for the battery regulation, probably the lifecycle data network is a good tool, and we are building our approach on that. And I would say that maybe if Batro, I heard that Batro is developing some lifecycle assessment, might be a good idea to develop a lifecycle inventory as well. That you could potentially share with the lifecycle data network. Still addressing question of confidentiality of things like that. There are means for that, and you are of course available to discuss on how to promote your finding in the lifecycle data network. Key conclusion, of course, more data, including lifecycle inventory, are of course needed for the implementation of the battery regulation. And maybe the second conclusion that I wrote yesterday, but that's quite aligned with the final conclusion of the CEPS paper today, is that we need cooperation along the value chain. If you want to be able to put on the available some data on lifecycle inventory, you of course need to cooperate with your supply chain. That's quite important, and happy to be here to discuss that. And I'm looking forward on the point of view of the panel on the social aspect. We have worked on it, but today I don't have too much to say, and I'm here to listen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Fabrice. Yeah, this was very good, really, and happy to see that a lot of your messages align with the Batro's messages as well. Yeah, allow me to say, of course, that when it comes to the movement of batteries and to the collection of batteries, I think if you look into the first papers, these are some of the messages we observed in Batro, that sometimes some clarity on how to move the batteries across borders. And I think a lot of people also within the project will be looking into these reports. We're not going to ask you later about the delegated act, but maybe we have some time to go a little bit further into the details of these reports at least, or if you have any further insights to share on the practicalities for moving batteries across borders and recycling batteries ultimately. Good, please.
Sorry, can I just ask a question?
Just say we will have a round of questions, but if it's brief.
It's 2 seconds.
Okay.
It's just on your previous slide about the recycling of batteries, and you had lithium. Are you looking at other products as well, like lead batteries, lithium phosphate, sodium ion, etc., or is it just lithium? Because
no, of course, we look.
Just the clarification.
I just insist on the importance to work at the new technologies, including for lithium. But of course, we look at the all batteries. Look in particular at the new category of batteries, which is lithium-ion batteries, where there were not specific rules for that. But of course, we look at the lead acid batteries, but we just revise them based on the existing rules.
Thanks, Megan. Good. Now I think we can move to Raji from Recharge. And Raji, I think you have raised your voice and your views on the carbon footprint in the public in the previous months. We're talking about, batteries regulation will change a lot in supply chains. And how do you see these developments? I mean, where do you have potential concerns or thoughts about where should be the future direction?
With regards to challenges, there are challenges, but I think when I present, I will give you one main issue is data issues and data quality issues. So if it's okay, if I could start the presentation. My name is Raji Kaur. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Recharge. Recharge is the Advanced Rechargeable and Lithium Batteries Association. And we manage and coordinate the Product Environmental Footprint Technical Secretariat, and we are updating the category rules for batteries. So this is kind of, well, we say parallel, but at the same time quite well intertwined with the work that has occurred on the carbon footprint methodology. We also have members of the JRC that have attended our product environmental footprint meetings, and I'll just go through the presentation now. No, this one. I haven't got my glasses, so I can barely see the the thing. Okay, so Recharge members, we have over 80 members across the entire battery value chain. So from the bottom left, you have your kind of extractors, all the way around, battery manufacturers, battery packs, and then bottom right, you have your recyclers. So we really represent the entire EU battery value chain here. So yes, I will discuss the carbon footprint, and then you have the product environmental footprint and what are the differences with the carbon footprint of the batteries regulation, which is a mandatory declaration now, an industry view, as well as closing remarks. So here I've taken figure 1 of the CEPS report that came out, I think, yesterday, really showing the carbon footprint requirements of the batteries regulation. So why do we have to, well, why should we calculate the carbon footprint? It's I guess the best, or the, I wouldn't say the easiest, but in terms of if you had to calculate all the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon footprint is the kind of best indicator or the best measure or the most sophisticated, robust way of calculating the impact any product, but here of course for batteries, what impact that has on the environment. And in the batteries regulation, you first will have to have a carbon footprint declaration, and then I think 18 months later, then you have the performance classes, and then finally, then you'll have the thresholds that will be calculated. So you can see in comparison to other battery products where your carbon footprint lies relative to others. I'll just go here so I can see what's going on. Yeah. So I want to talk about how the carbon footprint plays with respect to the product environmental footprint. So there are two kind of main differences. With the carbon footprint, it's mandatory. You will have to, if you place a battery on the EU market, depending on what type of battery, be it EV, industrial or LMT, you will have to have a carbon footprint declaration. But we also have the product environmental footprint category rules, and this began over 10 years ago, where the Commission wanted to have a kind of harmonized approach of how do we calculate the LCA of products. So they released a recommendation, so this is the Commission recommendation in 2013, not just for products but also for organizations, the OEF. And then from 2013 to 2018, there was a pilot phase. So you had for different products, kind of ways, according to the template of the Commission recommendation of how would you calculate the product environmental footprint. And so batteries were included in this pilot phase. And I guess a lot of that work has helped with the carbon footprint methodology. And in 2020, so we had an actual category rule, a handbook of how to calculate the product environmental footprint for batteries. But then an update came in 2021 of the Commission recommendation. So I've been working now at Recharge for 2 years, so heavily involved in updating these category rules. So we have stakeholders, again, across the battery value chain, members and non-members, that come to these meetings to see how we can update those rules. So as you can see at the top, there's a kind of big gap there. So as we're updating, and now at the bottom, you have the batteries regulation that came out. And before it even came out in August 2023, JRC had already published the first draft carbon footprint rules for EVs, and then the final one came out in June 23. So there's a lot of preparation that has occurred before the actual battery regulation came out. And then you have it follows on with then the industrial batteries. Then of course, the draft delegated act came out, and this is not the JRC, it's the Commission that have done that. So while that's going on, we're also going through our own public consultation on the batteries product environmental footprint. Now, in the batteries regulation, it states that the carbon footprint, comes off on the basis of the product environmental footprint, but we can see that there are some divergences. And when you ask the Commission, why do you have these divergences, it's to do with political issues. there are many similarities, but there are also huge differences as well. For example, with the impacts for the product environmental footprint, you calculate many different impacts. So climate change, ozone depletion, many land use, water use, resource use. But for carbon footprint, it is just the carbon that is calculated. In terms of LCA, the entire life cycle is calculated for the PEF, but for the carbon footprint, the use phase is not. And then the differences, of course, with methodology, the representative product, the hotspot identification, and then the data quality rating criteria. You have 4 in the PEF, but for the carbon footprint, I think one criteria such as precision is not included. And then, of course, differences, for example, in electricity modeling. So looking at the draft delegated act, I'm not going to go through all this, but you have many differences, and industry have put forward their concerns as we did in the consultation response. Functional unit, it's very simplified in comparison to the GRC final draft. There's no differentiation between accounting for mild and full hybrid batteries. It doesn't consider, for example, the number of cycles of battery electric vehicles and hybrids, and they're different. It assumes that they're the same. So then it's not representative or technically justified. So this creates major issues for mild and full hybrid batteries. I don't really want to talk about the second bullet point because I think we have spoken much about electricity modelling, and I would like to just state that it's a very contentious topic. It's become a political issue, but from the battery industry perspective, we believe a solution is required to protect European battery industry against unfair external competition and to avoid further fragmentation of the European single market. And we need to support the growth of a sustainable European battery industry. And here, quickly, page 2 of the draft delegated act, the carbon footprint of electric vehicles should be reported in kilogram CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour with a resolution of 0.001 kilogram CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. So, going into really intricate detail here, what does it mean by saying, resolution? How can that be defined? Does that mean, accuracy? And then to 3 decimal places. And to non-experts, this is quite misleading. It gives a very false sense of reliability. But if you think about, if you have the same battery model and you're putting the same inputs into various different software, tests have shown that you have different outputs. So then what does that mean? You'll have a different, even if you go to a resolution to 3 decimal places, you will have different values for the same battery model. So we're not quite understanding where the Commission is coming from, and this can be somewhat misleading. And so I really want to talk about, uncertainty around the value of the carbon footprint and how this should be communicated, because this is quite important. So in a recharge, we've come up with, the confidence range. So reflecting the quality, so this is super important, the quality of both the primary and secondary data stated along with the final, be it the carbon footprint or the product environmental footprint value. Because you do have data quality rating that you have to calculate with the draft delegated act, but it's not communicated with the final number. It's put in a supporting study next to it, but not actually with the value itself. So why is it required? Because whether you have, primary or secondary data, it means that primary data should always be used if secondary data is not available. Sorry. So 3 potential issues arise there. There's no method or verification process to kind of confirm organizations don't actually have primary data and that they, or don't have access to it, and that they have to use secondary data. So organizations may actually choose, it might be better for them, and their footprint or their value might be actually lower if they use secondary data. And in essence, you can say that this is a kind of greenwashing, and not really in the alignment or the ethos of calculating your product environmental footprint or carbon footprint. And the current data quality rating for the final PEF or carbon footprint analysis is an average rating of the primary and the secondary data. So it's very difficult to see the quality and the quantity of the primary data that's used. So here's an example. Say, for example, you have, 15.1 of your carbon footprint equivalent per kilowatt hour compared to 14.9. And as a consumer, you might say, oh, I'll go with the 14.9. But if you actually showed the quality of the data, and so this is basically the ranges, the 14.9, you have a large range, so the quality of the data, I'm simplifying it very, very much, but also due to time, but the quality of data is not so great, so you have a larger range. But then with the 15.1, it might be a higher value, but you can see that the quality of data is good because the range is smaller. So this is what we're trying to encourage, that it's all good and said calculating the carbon footprint or the product environmental footprint, but it's really essential that you have good quality and representative data behind it. And then just to conclude, there are many differences between the PEF and the carbon footprint, but there are also similarities. There are many important topics that we should also be discussing at this time, especially when industry are really gearing up and preparing themselves of how to calculate the carbon footprint, which is mandatory. So there's a difference. The PEF is voluntary and the carbon footprint will be mandatory. So clarification of the calculation methods and the definition, clarification of data collection, and of course issues with data quality.
Thanks a lot, Raji. There was really a lot of information on your presentation. Is there any question of clarification, something that was not clear? Because, I think Rishi really gave a good overview of what's coming and the complexities we have at this stage. Could I just ask for clarification on the issue on the decimals? Is it a question of how they introduce the value in the system, that different systems will accept the values in a different way?
I don't know, but from what it states is that your final value has to be to 3 decimal places. And what we're saying from industry, this can be quite misleading because it states as if this is very, very accurate. And by having it to 3 decimal places, that's not what it shows.
Okay. All right, excellent. So we can get into these points later. So maybe I move now to Carol, and we know these requirements will ultimately affect the actors who put the product in the market. So there are a lot of things to be anticipated by your sector. So yeah, we look forward to your perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Can I get the clicker?
Oh.
Thank you. So my name is Karol Bednarek. I represent the German Association of the Automotive Industry. I'm the consultant of raw materials, which doesn't make sense when I'm talking about CO2 footprint. But however, the methodology is top to bottom. So we look, of course, into batteries and therefore the needs for raw materials in those batteries. And then, of course, we look also into the footprint of CO2. However, what is also very important for me, the title of the discussion was how far can we go when it comes to ESG requirements in the battery value chain. So it's not only CO2 footprint that we look at. There's, especially when it comes to raw materials, a lot of issues when it comes to human rights issues in the DRC, which we also have to conquer. So the CO2 footprint, of course, is very important, but the other aspects, we cannot forget about them. Yeah, but let me start with a brighter view. The German Association of the Automotive Industry is pretty unique because we not only represent the OEMs, but also the suppliers. So 620 members are in the VDA, and we know all the issues that the suppliers have with the OEMs and what the OEMs have with the suppliers. So when it comes to sharing data, this is of course very important. What I want to show you here is our CO2 fleet emission targets that we have to fulfill. Doesn't have to do anything with the supply chain, but of course with the product that we put on the market. And therefore, when it comes to an LCA, and you look into the life cycle assessment for the whole life application, of course this is key. So the targets that we have to face in the next few years, especially next year, there's already another step that we have to take: minus 15% CO2 emissions per car in the fleet, which is also already very hard to achieve, especially when you look at the problems that we have right now when it comes to the selling of battery electric vehicles, especially in Germany. Minus 29% market share is what we believe we will have to face this year in Germany, and therefore the European market, of course, also has a dent. However, I can assure you the automotive industry is still very much behind this issue. We've been producing the same amount of battery electric vehicles this year as we did last year, so there is already the product out there. And there's also been taken some measures by our OEMs to make it a little bit more appealing to buy such a car. Of course, it's not just the price, it's also total cost of ownership that we have to face, and therefore other issues come into place as well. But let's not talk about that today, because we want to focus on battery value chain. Yeah, what does it mean when we do more electric vehicles on the market? It basically just puts the CO2 emissions that we had in the whole life cycle assessment from the street to the production. So the backpack that our cars now have is a lot bigger than it was before, and it's a little bit more complicated to get those data. So everything that recharges, or Raji just said from recharge, we see that issues they are already there, and of course we are keen to go there and find some more transparency. However, it's not that easy to find also good data which can fulfill our requirements. The link, the QR code, leads you to our publications that we did 2 years ago. Unfortunately, the publication is only available in German language, but there's a lot of good applications that help you to translate even whole documents, so I hope it will be still a benefit for you to look at it. Yeah, and what we just see here is that we have to look a little bit more and more into the whole value chain than before, and this is especially important when we look into the battery value chain. So if let's say the transformation in our electric vehicles goes to more nickel-rich batteries than before. So at the beginning, like 10 years ago, there was maybe an NMC 111, which 1/3 of the cathode was basically made out of nickel, and now we are going through a road to replace cobalt with nickel, and therefore the nickel content is rising. Why is this important? Well, nickel has not just one CO2 footprint. It has many footprints, of course, and when it comes to raw materials, it's the same like when it comes to looking for a house. Location is everything. When we are looking, we worked together with Manviro last year, so this report is also 1 year old. This one is in English, so please download it. You can use it better. When we look into the nickel value chain, when you go, let's say, to a very green way, where there's a lot of certainty that this data is available when it comes to the CO2 emissions, then we can reach a footprint of approximately 7.1 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per 1 kilogram nickel and nickel sulfate, which is very good because the mean by the Nickel Institute is about 16 kilograms, so you can go better than the mean is, of course. However, if you're looking into the value chain, where Indonesia will have a more and more prominent role there, because the market share will be rising for nickel sulfate and our batteries to approximately 62% when the figures of the IEA are correct, then of course we have to look into the other production paths a little bit more closely. And now you can see that we have a variation which can be 12 times bigger or even 14 times bigger than the best way to produce nickel sulfate. And this is an issue for us, because if you go to a margin where nickel, because we will be using more and more nickel in the future, goes above 80 kilograms per kilograms CO2 equivalent per nickel and nickel sulfate, we don't actually have a case for our electric vehicles anymore, because the baggage will be so big that I don't know how many kilometers our cars have to go. It's about 350,000, 400,000 kilometers to be par with an ICE vehicle. We think that the batteries will be able to do that without a doubt, because the batteries are better than maybe the people think that they are, because you can charge them a little bit longer and more often than the people maybe assumed. However, 400,000 kilometers is a figure that not many cars reach in the European Union, to be honest. So this is a huge issue for us. That's why we are looking especially into the LCAs of raw materials as well. However, the automotive industry didn't start to look into circular economy just yesterday. So we've been always a keen player. I just wanted to show you the figures, the 9 R's that they are in the automotive circular economy, actually. So we do basically everything, and already today we can recycle 85% of the raw materials in the car. This is based not on our figures, but on the figures of the German statistics department. The figures are from 2019, so maybe they're a little bit old. But we are still working on it to be better at this recovery rate. So 85% is not, let's say, the ceiling, but it's, let's say, it's something that we want to improve on, which we will, of course, also try to reach when it comes to electric vehicles. We know that maybe it's not that easy to recycle lithium out of the batteries, but we hope that the process will be better and better so that we can reach the targets within the battery regulation there. When it comes to the carbon footprint emissions, I mean, Raji just showed you the figure one of the yesterday published report. I don't want to go into that much more detail because, yeah, it's true. From next year, we have to fulfill some informations with the CO2 footprints, which we right now don't have the data for. So secondary data, which actually this is secondary data. Because get primary data, nobody wants to share the data right now when it comes to the raw materials department, but this is the only approach that we can do. Of course, there is still some issues for greenwashing, but I can tell you that if there's just one player who has a lower CO2 footprint within this path, and he sees this figure, he's trying everything to make his own data publish. So secondary data is very, very useful when it comes to put some pressure to get some primary data as well. Especially when the figures are a little bit higher and the producer is a little bit better than the secondary data. What we've been focusing right now at the VDA, or at least for the last 2 years, where I participated, was the recycling content of this, which are required in the battery regulation. We've been looking into the question whether or not we can reach those targets with our own cars, so with our own products. So we did a projection about our cars, our battery electric cars, which are already there on the market, and we found out that unfortunately our cars are longer on the street than maybe the people who thought about this recycling content, and we found out that unfortunately we cannot reach those recycling content targets with a feedstock of just end-of-life vehicles. So we have to get this shredded portions. We have to get this recycling content from somewhere else. I mean, we don't look into production scrap here, and at this figure, we think that production scrap maybe is able to fulfill this gap. However, if it's not, because the process maybe become more and more efficient, which of course we also hope because this is more sustainable, we have to get the scraps from somewhere else, like consumer electronics maybe, or from other markets. So when it comes to, I think we will have a discussion about the CO2 footprint later. I don't want to give too much information before that, but of course we've been working with the government as well in Germany, because we have also this issue, like I said, we don't get the data for the CO2 footprint. However, we have to pay the fees when we don't get the data, actually, or when we don't put the products down, like the battery electric vehicles, we have to pay the fees. So it's very important for us to find a way that the responsibility within the value chain is also shared, not only the benefits by switching to this, let's say, fulfilling this transformation. And it's not only the battery regulation that we have to fulfill when it comes to CO2 footprints. We have the CSRD and, of course, the German Supply Chain Act, where we also have to put in some information. We have the battery regulation. We have the EU Green Claims Directive. Then, of course, there's a lot of projects, or let's say, maybe not projects, but if you want to get some money from the government, for example, for like subsidies or something like that, of course, this is also linked to CO2 footprint. So this is also a tool that the government's already using, which is good, we believe, because it will only give benefits to those who are really working on the green transition. Then we, of course, have CBAM, which we maybe will see become a little bit more powerful. Right now it works already for steel. Maybe it will work in the future for other raw materials as well. We don't know that yet. And the financial market players, of course, also demand CO2 data from us. So if you want to get some funding or some credit, for example, for a production plant, we also have to fulfill some requirements when it comes to CO2 footprint. Otherwise, we will not get the same interest rates that we will get when the CO2 footprint is a little bit lower. So it's a whole big picture. It's not only the battery regulation, and that's why methodology on how to calculate this those CO2 emissions is very, very important. Because in every regulation, at least from my understanding, because I'm not the expert, my colleagues just told me, it's not that clear that maybe the CBAM also uses the same calculation as the battery regulation, as the financial players, or maybe the subsidy schemes by the commissions, and this is not good, because this could lead to greenwashing. You get funding from there, but you cannot account it in a different regulation, for example. And when it comes especially to the battery regulation, what was very, very important for my members is that the approach that we will not be able to use power purchasing agreements, PPAs, in the calculation of the CO2 footprint for our batteries is not the way to go, because everything that we've been done so far to make the green transition happening was purchasing those PPAs. So it was a way that we could handle, let's say, the CO2 footprint, which we don't have any other way to, put the CO2 emissions down, because we don't have a direct influence on the national grid. So PPAs was a way where we could, handle this situation, because we could purchase those power purchasing agreements, therefore lowering down our own CO2 footprint. And with this purchasing, of course, there was some money there to invest into the green transition when it comes to the energy markets. If we will not be able to use PPAs in our calculations, why should our members still use those PPAs and fund the green transition when it comes to energy? So maybe also these targets will be then in danger, because there will be no funding from an industry which is very powerful and was very much using those PPAs agreements, which will be, maybe a disaster at the end. But this is, everything that I wanted to tell you right now. If you want to, stay in touch, then just use the QR code. There will be my contact details there.
Thanks a lot, Carol. Is there any quick question for clarification? Something was not clear in the presentation, or no? On the point of the 400,000 kilometers. So basically, what you mean is that, according to your calculations, a battery has to stay for this range on the street to have a positive carbon footprint outcome. That's what I understood.
Yes, of course, it really depends on the grid that you use, or the power grids, what the footprint of the energy is that you put in your batteries. But of course, it really depends. This is something I wanted to say in the discussion later as well. There's not just one LCA that you go through once. It's a very dynamic situation there, because sometimes if you switch suppliers for the same battery, actually, but you will use different nickel suppliers, or maybe different lithium suppliers, all of a sudden the whole LCA has a different result. And of course, then it really depends on which software you use. But yeah, in a simplified case where we just been using the data available for us and the assumptions that we had for the grid, we came up with this number that the car to be par, let's say the battery electric vehicles to be par with an ICE, it was 400,000 kilometers to travel with this one battery to be par with the ICE vehicle. But as I said, it was an extreme scenario as well.
All right. Good. Thanks for the clarification. I think now we can move to Maeva from Electromobility Research Center. So you have been researching on these topics, and do you have, first of all, good news to share with us from your results?
Let's see if I have good news. But thanks. Thank you first for inviting me here. So we'll talk about life cycle sustainability of batteries, specifically for electric vehicles. So I'm part of VUB, University of Brussels, so MOBI, Electromobility Research Center. We have 5 key groups. So on electric and autonomous vehicle, on batteries, obviously, on power electronics. Also, Evergy, my team, is working on electric vehicle and integration in the energy grid. And also, we have a team on lighting. And we've been working, and we are working in many different European projects on batteries. So these are some what we've been or we will also work on. And so now I will show you some of the results that we have from some of these projects. So I will move a bit away from the carbon footprint. I'll first talk about social life cycle assessment. And for this assessment, we use a reference scale approach. So we have different risk levels from no risk to very high risk. And for different and many different indicators, we use, this reference scale approach. And for instance, for life expectancy at birth and their effect on social impact, we have, different risk level that we can associate to each country. For instance, Belgium has a life expectancy at birth above 80 years, so we are here in a country with no risk on this indicator. And we do this for many different indicators, so we can also do this for child employment. So, of course, if you have 0% child employment in a country, then it's no risk. And, of course, this is quite difficult on a methodological point of view. I will not dig into this, but still, this is how we do this. And then we can do and apply this for all the countries that supply the materials that are in batteries. So if we look, for instance, at cobalt, then we have the different countries. So this is cobalt mining. So the different country that mine country, main one being DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And then we have different stakeholders in those countries. So we look at society, workers, local community and value chain actors. And for each of them, we have different indicators that have different risk levels. So this is how we can look at direct impact of mining in a country. So then we can see, that there are always risks in every supply chain, but we can always find better, supplying such it for the carbon footprint. Okay, then I was missing one indicator level. And we also do, of course, environmental life cycle assessment. So we look at the carbon footprint. So here calculated for 4 different batteries per kilowatt hour delivered. So you can see here, as well, we already know that use stage is still quite important, but of course battery manufacturing is important. But if we looked at other indicators that were mentioned in the PEF, for instance, freshwater eutrophication, so water pollution, and also effects on human health, so human toxicity, we can see that there is quite a difference. Outcome is that then manufacturing, in fact, it comes from also the mining waste here is important. But all these indicators have different, let's say, certainty level that we need to take into account. And then we can bring together our different assessments. So here we can bring together, for instance, different impacts, so climate change and freshwater eutrophication, and also look at eco-efficiency, so net present value of the different batteries that we assessed. So we have a base case battery manufactured in China. And if we look at different material supply routes, then we can improve, or I didn't put it there, but of course, if we use, nickel from Indonesia, then it's not an improvement, obviously. But here you can see the effect that it can have on the climate change and other indicators, of the different supply routes. You can do this also for other improvement pathways, so upscaling in, different gigafactory levels. You can also optimize the process. So here it was a change of a solvent that we used for the different slurries. You can move from China to here is Sweden. So then you improve also here by including more renewable sources in your electricity mix during manufacturing. You can improve the carbon footprint of your battery. And you can also have second life, which is not the topic, let's say, today. And then we can bring all this together and see the range that we can have for a similar battery with different, data behind. And then we can do this for the 4 batteries that I presented before. And what we can see is that we don't need to only focus on climate change because there are trade-offs. I didn't highlight it that much in the presentation, but you could see that the trend for both impacts, so climate change and eutrophication, can be quite different. So there are trade-offs, and we need to go beyond carbon footprints. And we could see also that the key parameters that are important are the reference flow, so the lifetime of the battery, and also the energy density. So energy density is defined by the battery. This is quite, defined parameter, but the lifetime, of course, is very important when we do an LCA, and this is not straightforward, of course, because we do it before the battery is leaving its life. We also propose to do this social efficiency, so looking at different indicators also for the social impact. So here we have the impact on workers and also not an impact but a benefit, so the value added. I will not dig into the detail, but you can see that here also you can have quite some trade-offs between the different impacts. And also the material supply is very important when you look at the impact, because depending, of course, of where you manufacture, when you mine, you will not affect the people the same way, because human rights are obviously different. But also what I want to highlight is that the use stage is also important for the social impacts. When we think of batteries and their social impacts, we always think of mining, of cobalt, nickel, etc. But for the use stage and electricity supply, there are also workers that do work, that also mine, supply materials, and that also are affected. So we should not also forget this. And when we do social life cycle assessment, the full life cycle needs to be taken into account. And here we could see also that there are trade-offs between the different impacts, so environmental and social impacts, and also between different social impacts. And the same key parameters were found important, so the energy density and also the reference flow, which is influenced by the lifetime. So to conclude, I want to say that we need to go beyond carbon footprint, because if we only, this is great that we have this battery regulation and we have carbon footprint regulation. That's really, good for the environment, obviously, but we need to go beyond, because, of course, we are not only facing this challenge today. When we look at the different batteries, of course, we need to have primary data for the specific raw materials, because this influences not only the carbon footprint, but other impacts. And when we look at the social LCA of batteries, the full life cycle is important. And also, specifically for social LCA is that, gathering data may be even more difficult because it touches human rights in countries where they may not be respected. So the data quality there for some countries, such as China, which is not very transparent, let's say it, is very, very difficult. And it's a key also to be able to do this kind of social LCA. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amaeva. And is there any question for clarification? Yeah. If you can turn on your microphone, yeah. And maybe introduce yourself briefly, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Francesco Ghezzi, I'm a researcher from Italy. Would like to ask you which kind of data are used in the social life cycle assessment in order to make this, the evaluation of the categories as you presented.
So this is based on Silkia database, which use mainly public available data, but of course it's not available for all the countries. And then we do also some qualitative assessments, which I didn't present here, but this is based on mainly public available data.
Okay, very good. And I think with your presentation, you open a new Pandora box for our discussion, the trade-offs between social and environmental aspects. It will be good to hear also, what the industry thinks about this later in the discussion. But I think this also gives us a good bridge to Emily from Transport and Environment, who will also dive into the social aspects and the due diligence requirements of the battery regulation. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I also have the... Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Emily Ritchie, a policy manager at Transport and Environment. Going back to the topic of today's session on addressing environmental and social impacts, and I think as we've heard, several times now, looking at sort of everything from the extraction of raw materials through to battery manufacturing and recycling. So on the environmental side, I will take a look at, as T&E, what we want to see from the carbon footprint, but then also look at some of the wider tools we have to address both environmental and social risks through the supply chain taking a look specifically at the battery regulation due diligence provisions, as mentioned. So very quickly, for those that don't know TNE, we're Europe's largest clean transport and energy group, headquartered here in Brussels with offices across Europe. And so before we go into some of the detail, I just thought I'd show this slide on the life cycle emissions of an electric car versus a petrol car. An average EU electric car are more than 3 times cleaner than petrol cars. So just sort of worth bearing in mind the bigger picture when we're talking about sort of carbon footprint and environmental impacts. And then coming back to the EU policy landscape and the EU batteries regulation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So of course, one key element is the carbon footprint that we've been discussing a lot today, but there are a lot of other tools foreseen within the regulation to address environmental and social impacts of batteries, such as the due diligence provisions that will come into force in August of next year, and that I'll go into a little bit more detail on later. So coming back to carbon footprint, here we can see, and I'll just sort of go through a little bit TNE's recommendations. Here we can see the battery carbon footprint per country, assuming that we use the grid. So when we look at the EU average, the darker blue on the grid there, we can see it gives all manufacturers a competitive advantage compared to China. So this leads us to looking at, as TNE, how we see the calculation of the battery carbon footprint. And really here just wanting to stress that it should reflect the real world use of electricity, so via on-site generation rather than through guarantees of origin. And here you can see on this graph some data that we've got showing where guarantees of origin can artificially reduce the carbon footprint of a battery. So yeah, the recommendation really is using grid average, simple, easy to enforce, and as mentioned, this is really Europe's differentiator compared to China. So yeah, just a final point on that. This is sort of as TNE where we'd see a kind of a landing point compromise. So I think priority is aiming to reach an agreement as soon as possible on the methodology for the Delegated Act, as we're seeing green investments in Europe stalling. In the first step, using that EU grid average for 2025 to 2030, and then moving to national grid as of 2030, and then in parallel, the thresholds applying from 2028, as discussed. So, as mentioned, assessing carbon footprint is one element, but there are, obviously it's important to address wider social environmental risks in the battery supply chain, and here this is where the due diligence rules are key, and as mentioned, they come into force in August next year. And we'll introduce mandatory due diligence across key environmental and social risks for lithium, nickel, cobalt, and graphite, and are based on OECD guidelines and UN guiding principles. So, what does this mean? Key companies will need to adopt and communicate a company battery due diligence policy aligned with international standards, implementing a system of traceability all the way to the mine, as well as establishing grievance and remedy mechanisms, and critically identifying and assessing those risks in the supply chain, and then designing and implementing a strategy to respond, working with suppliers. And then finally, making sure that those systems are verified by an independent third party. So, as we're building up to the rules coming into place next summer, it's key now to be sort of planning proactively, implementing those management systems, and working on continuous monitoring and accountability. Important just to stress the importance of working with actors on the ground, so everything from rights holders, local communities, workers' unions, and indigenous peoples. And then making sure to sort of spread kind of responsibility across suppliers and buyers, and having those transparent supply chain relationships And then finally, when it comes to the Commission, as we're building up to the rules coming into place, working with producing and mineral-rich companies to inform of the implications of the regulation and critically supporting smaller companies in these regions. So what is coming next? The Commission will publish guidelines for the implementation of the due diligence provisions by February of next year. And we're expecting a consultation on these shortly. For us, it's really key that these guidelines stress the importance of the economic operator being responsible for carrying out that due diligence right across their supply chain as that preferred baseline. And then, of course, this can be supported by due diligence to control points with regular verification of data. And then industry schemes can come in to support with meeting those requirements. So the second element, building on that, is that next year the Commission will publish a delegated act on criteria for the recognition of industry schemes, which then can support with the due diligence requirements. Again, important to stress, these schemes are not a substitute for an economic operator carrying out their own effective due diligence, but can support. And just maybe quickly to go through some of our criteria of what we think should be included in that delegated act is really making sure that any scheme has multi-stakeholder governance with equal representation. They have to be independent and include site-level audits with those findings made public. And then using best practice environmental stewardship, particularly across waste and biodiversity. And then finally, ensuring full respect of human and labor rights, alignment with international conventions, declarations, and bills, and commitment to EFIC and the UN Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People. So I think all of that is just to go through, the lots of tools that we have under the battery regulation, and now critically it's about getting the implementation right over the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Is there any question for clarification? Something was not clear? Maybe we can get later into what you expect from the guidelines of the Commission next year. I guess you have more detailed views on this. But now it's the time for discussion and for taking broader questions from you. So who would like to step in? I mean, let's check a little bit how many questions we might have to start with. So everything was clear. All right. Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Kıvanç Peker from Turkey, Turkish Energy, Nuclear and Mineral Research Agency. I'm expert of energy, especially for nuclear energy. I have a question especially for Fabrice Mathieu and Raji Kaur, because they talked about lithium specifically. In the future, can you predict decreasing amount of lithium in the future? Because this century, humanity focused on energy storage because of decreasing amount of fuel or organic fuel. This century we have to storage energy thanks to lithium or other metals. But I just predict that lithium recycled metals amounts or recycled lithium or other metals amount will decrease thanks to developing technologies such as hydrogen energy. Can you say that, can you say something about our peak point of using lithium? Can we say, can we talk about decreasing amount of recycled lithium? Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Is there any further question at this stage? All right. Maybe, I don't know, do you have something to say on lithium in batteries and technology evolution? And Fabrice or Raji, is there something you can comment upon? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So sorry for misunderstanding. I gave a specific focus on lithium batteries because that was a novelty of the battery regulation and all the technical work we are doing. And I also gave a focus on lithium because there is a challenge on recycling lithium. Also, I saw already some grams of lithium going out from recycling plants last year. So that's why I gave the focus on. Lithium will not decrease in principle in lithium-ion batteries, will remain there very much. We foresee a bit less cobalt, it was mentioned also by Carol, and a bit less cobalt and more nickel. So lithium in lithium-ion batteries will remain for long. On the big point, I cannot tell you. I mean, yes, hydrogen is being developed, even including for mobility. Not sure it will work for vehicles, for passenger cars. There are some. It could work maybe for trucks. But so we have got some numbers on 2030, 2040, but they will not replace lithium-ion batteries for the next 20, 30 years for sure. But yes, of course, we are looking at the materials also in hydrogen technologies and making sure. I mean, most important materials of hydrogen are also critical materials, and we need to ensure accessibility. Circularity of these materials is probably not a big problem because they have got a lot of value, something about palladium, platinum, and etc. But yes, we need to consider also the sourcing of raw materials for this technology as well. But sorry, no numbers on the peak of lithium-ion batteries.
All right. Very good. Now, I'm going to go ahead with asking one question. I think there is one question that perhaps everyone has something to say, and it comes down to the difficulties in acquiring certain data, which we heard from many of the panelists. And I think, Carol, you also mentioned that, that secondary data can encourage companies in the longer run to also share primary data. So I was wondering if we could be a little bit more specific about which data categories we feel like at this stage is very difficult to obtain primary sources and we have to rely on secondary sources, or in general any take on categories on specific categories of data that the market is not ready yet to share, if I can use this expression. Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to data, of course, we want to use primary data. However, when it comes to real life, there's not a lot of primary data available. So then, of course, secondary data comes in. However, what an effect or how much it puts pressure on the players on the market, I really don't know. We don't have this. We didn't do this kind of research, so I hope, this is basically my hope, that the secondary data can put pressure on the market players. Whether it does, I really don't know. However, when it comes to data, of course, as I said, we would like to have certain attributes to this data. So first of all, it has to be representative of the application. Then it should be validated by other players as well who are neutral. This data has to be reliable, complete, of course. It should be, in the best case scenario, just-in-time data, so not data that is 2 years old or something older even than that. And you should be able to measure this data as well. Why do I say that? Because then, if these attributes are fulfilled, we can use this data very, very good in our software systems and so on. When it comes to how to share this data, of course, we think this is only because, of course, there's some intellectual property, of course, behind it. So that maybe that's why some companies are not willing to share this data. So it has to be a peer-to-peer solution, basically. And the German industry is participating in building up Catena X. Maybe you heard about it. It's about sharing data along the value chain in the automotive industry. And of course, you can use the same technology to share also data for the carbon footprint. It's just one attribute more than it already is. So right now, what we share is like amounts and other certifications when it comes to certain products. But of course, the CO2 footprint can also be fulfilled in this in this data set actually. So as long as we don't have primary data, we have to use secondary data because if we don't use anything, we will not get any step further in this situation or in this issue. And of course, as I mentioned, if we don't fulfill the targets, we have to pay fees. So that's why we are very, very keen to pursue this road, to find more transparency. And this is where, of course, the political parties or the governments, and of course the European Commission as well, has to fulfill their roles as well. So I think, for example, from a raw materials perspective, we do have now 14 raw materials partnerships globally, where we have these memorandum of understandings in which we go or define a path to go together when it comes to research and to share some information about raw materials and to help other countries as well to find out how raw materials rich they are, for example. And of course, we can use this approach as well to find more transparency in this value chain. So to use the raw materials partnerships to find more transparency when it comes to the raw materials that we use in our batteries would be very, very important. So these raw material partnerships are really a benefit for us when they are used properly. And I hope that tomorrow, at least at the Critical Raw Materials Summit tomorrow, you will hear something about that as well, on how to use raw materials partnerships, on what the roads for those raw materials partnerships will be. However, when it comes to this data, and primary data is something that is very company specific, then it is of course very, very important not to cut corners. So cutting corners, for example, would be using the CO2 footprint of the grid, which Emily just told us, because of course it's easy to get this data because this data is available. This would be some sort of secondary raw materials data, but the companies have actually no influence to make a change when it comes to the grid CO2 emissions, because this is something that the state does. We do have in Germany a green, or we had a coalition where the Greens were very prominent when it came to shutting down nuclear power plants. And of course, our CO2 footprint was rising, it was skyrocketing basically. And you could see that on the figure that Emily just showed you. We are way above the EU average, which is not good for our investments in the battery production plants. So, and as companies, we do not have any influence about this. And this is not good. We are responsible for it, but we don't have influence on it. And this is something that's not working. So market-based measures should be key here.
Yes, maybe Raj, you, and then I give the floor to Emily, but you can go ahead, yes.
Okay, so in response to what Carol said with regards to secondary data, like if there is no primary data available to of course have use secondary data. So from industry perspective, recharge perspective, we really encourage that the Commission do provide high quality data in the form of the EF 4.0 to make sure that, you know, fill the gaps that have been recognized with EF 3.1, and also to make sure that for the same processes that there are a range of secondary data available to really reflect the processes that are occurring. So to make sure that all industry can then go to this one database, which is hopefully robust and good quality data that we can all use. When it's coming out, I'm not sure. They are working on it. We have gone through, provided feedback to their consultations. They've asked where are the gaps, what kind of processes need to be included. So we really hope that they will be able to produce something of high quality there. And then also how to share the data. In the draft delegated act, it does have 3 different ways that you can share the data. So you can provide the LCI, the life cycle information, directly to the manufacturer. You can provide it in the form of a data set. So upstream, they calculate for each process the carbon footprint. So it's you provide the carbon footprint, but not the actual data. And then the third way of the life cycle information is through a data management company, so a third party. So it does stipulate the various ways you can provide the data, and I guess while we implement, we'll see where the kind of which creases need to be ironed out, but there are various ways to do so.
All right, yes. No, on all of these 3 points, of course, you know, there can be questions. I mean, we have to see how the market reacts, of course, because when it comes, for example, to companies share directly the LCA data, but we heard from their research that sometimes they use different reference units, so it's not always of use for the player in the value chain. And when it comes to sharing like data sets, then there's a question, you know, how to what extent we can trust these claims. I think but I guess maybe it's too early to say where the gaps are exactly. You know, no, maybe something we can pick up later. Emily, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, maybe just quickly on the carbon footprint on the electricity point to come back. I mean, I think this is really why we suggest, as the first step in the first phase, using the EU grid average and then moving across to national grids as a sort of, a proposed compromise to put forward, and really the importance here of, trying to stress this is where the advantage against China can be found and where other solutions, are not necessarily going to create those advantages. But yeah, I mean, you take the point, and I think we can also come back on some detail. Maybe just then on the data point, I think this can also be applied to the discussion on due diligence and the importance there on the use of the sort of real world data and the kind of continuous updating of data, the continuous monitoring and regular auditing, and how that's then feeding into the due diligence process.
And on the due diligence, I mean, is there any specific aspects that you see like now it's really difficult to verify this kind of claims? Is there any specific elements where you see like that the market is not responding the way it was supposed to respond, or you think it's too early to say? Yeah.
I think it's still early to say. So I think there are some great examples of some industry really leading the way on some of their public reporting around their raw material sourcing. I think now it's key just to sort of get those systems in place ahead of August. I think getting the criteria for the recognition of schemes right, making sure that that's really strong, will also be an important step. And as well, the due diligence guidelines, I think from an initial work we did and some initial conversations, there was some concern that the guidelines risked putting too much emphasis on the use of schemes, on the use of verification points. And so I think we need, a really strong tool there on highlighting the importance of the economic operators' responsibility throughout their supply chain and for the entire due diligence process.
All right. Fabrice, I would eventually come to you as well. I'm not going to ask you what's going to include, of course, in the delegated act, but on the whole discussion around primary and secondary data, which I'm sure you looked into the GSC reports, and then, of course, there's concrete in your report, there's concrete recommendations where we should use primary data and where secondary. But yeah, I mean, how do you feel about this discussion, and whether you think that there were certain areas that really also pose the challenge to you to come up with these recommendations because you don't have the evidence yet? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. And thank you for the contribution, very, very interesting and inspiring. I'd like to remind something to you still. We have been talking about the carbon footprint now. It was proposed only in October 2020 in the proposal, then it was discussed, so we went a long way since then. I just want to say as well that comparability of results and data quality was at the heart of the proposal because it was related to product and environmental footprint, was prescribing product and environmental footprint. So, of course, there are challenges, but it was part of the proposal as well. So that's really important to remind. So I'm very happy to hear all the discussions. We agree that so quality of data is super important. It's part of the proposal as well on the technical detail. And of course, the devil is in the details now. So how to implement that and which DQR to use, etc. So yes, we are trying to work on data. We are making our own calculations. We'll not share them today because we don't have access to as many good data as you who have members. But yeah, I mean, the proposal we have made also on our own calculations on where should be important to ask for primary data. I take note of the remark from a charge from Ajay. It's true, there's nobody to check whether there is availability of primary data or not. Still, we remind that what's available in secondary data usually is average data. So there is so much innovation at the moment in the industry that we still believe that actually the industry will have benefit in using primary data to show how good they are, because, I mean, how good they are, how improved they are. So yes, there is always a risk. We probably need to find ways to verify this kind of thing. But there is a real, from our calculations, there is a real driver to use primary data for many of the processes. So we are a bit, okay, I would be a bit more positive than you. But of course, we need to have a strong verification as well, for sure. Sorry, I cannot answer much more, but maybe I would like to turn then, sorry, to colleagues who have members. So of course the rules are not defined, etc. We are playing with our own data, own data set. are you members also playing with data? Are they assuming some decisions on the calculations? Are you members exchanging data along the value chain to not make calculation of numbers yet, but to check confidentiality aspect, what can I share, how we can, I mean, it was mentioned by Carol, the Catena X, for example, so maybe not using tools itself, but trying to see when we have clear rules, how can we start exchanging data, aggregating data. So I would like to hear, and we're of course happy to work with you on some results as well.
To answer that one, yes, there are many questions with regards to how to kind of implement the carbon footprint methodology. I can give you an example as we're updating the product environmental footprint category rules. So as earlier you said, you know, you have done much work, and I think the product environmental footprint, the whole premise and the whole kind of that area has really laid the foundation for the work for the carbon footprint, to identify where the hotspots are, where, you know, primary data is very relevant, and what we should have to look on, because when you're doing a life cycle analysis, it's very kind of a long, complex process, and to have primary data across the entire, you know, the life cycle would be long and take a lot of time and resources and finances. So I think that's really important. The kind of questions that we are getting asked now is, well, again, going back to the product environmental footprint, to move forward, to have the update, we have to do supporting studies to make sure that the rules that we have defined and agreed on actually work. And unfortunately, we're not having any members or non-members come forward and say, yeah, we'll do the calculations, because the methodology is somewhat different from the carbon footprint. And a lot of time and concentration is on them doing the calculation for the carbon footprint. And I would love to know what the differences are in numerical values, but we don't have that information because companies are not providing that information to us. But we're also getting questions, for example, about notified bodies. So, for example, a member who is a kind of midstream or upstream is saying that, you know, our customers are, you know, we have several customers. Does that mean we'll have notified bodies from each customer coming to our site? What will that mean? Will we have incoherent, you know, reports of how our processes are conducted? So how do we cope with that? Like, it's not stipulated exactly in the draft delegated act. Another question was, okay, we're going through it, but exactly which ones are the non-mandatory processes and which ones are exactly the primary, you know, data that we can use. So even now we're having these questions coming up to us. But I think the positive note is industry is preparing a lot. You know, it's not like just waiting for the delegated act to come out. There's a lot of pre-preparation that is going on, and a lot of hard work and a lot of time and resources going into this. I'll stop there.
Yeah, let me just add a few thoughts on that as well. As I told you earlier, 620 members are at the VDA, and most of them are, of course, SMEs. So we are talking about companies, maybe 50 people working there, maybe even less. And for them, it's very hard to do an LCA, because they don't have the manpower to do that. They don't have the money to hire someone who has an expert in LCA. And actually, there's not a lot of people out there who know how to calculate LCAs. And therefore, for example, we've been doing an assessment based on the Critical Raw Materials Act to trace down some raw materials in our products. And I mean, there's not just one application where you can use lithium or rare earth elements, for example. There's like 100 applications for permanent magnets in a vehicle. And then if you go down this value chain down and up until the mine, for one critical raw material, you can have over 150 points in the whole value chain. And you have to ask every one of them whether or not they know what an LCA is, because there's a lot of companies still out there in the world which don't know what an LCA is. How do they calculate the CO2 footprint? And then we have to tell them how to do it, and it's not that very easy. So we think that, especially when it comes to SMEs, the government should find a way to train them or to help them to do this LCA assessments, to this life cycle assessments, and of course focusing therefore also on the CO2. And this is not happening right now. which is of course not very good because, as we mentioned earlier, as well, there's not a harmonized system, so you have to find a way on to applicate which rules to which application, and therefore we think that harmonization of those systems should also be key. However, we know that the qualities of different systems on calculating CO2 footprints are different, so you cannot cross-reference and so on. So we have to find a way to level up those systems, and then we could harmonize them, of course. And this is something that will take time, which unfortunately is something we don't have, because next year we have to report our CO2 footprints.
I was about to ask this because also one of the things we found out during this research is that there's a lot of LCA tools available, and what we heard from some actors is that they don't necessarily produce the same results. It will take some time for the market to react, I understand, but I mean, do you see any need for support in the short term? Do you think there should be some kind of, I don't know, guidelines on how to use these tools or some form of consolidation? I don't know if I can come up with something.
Yeah, so consolidation, as I said, just when we have the same level of certainty about this data, then maybe we can talk about consolidation and harmonizing. However, we of course think that we have to have some sort of a single point of contact maybe, which can help SMEs, especially SMEs, to calculate their CO2 footprint. So this is something that we need ASAP, actually. However, when it comes to, let's say, this data quality and so on, we know that it's hard to get this data. I mean, we've been talking with Manvaro, when we've been talking with Manvaro, we of course been looking into other companies that could provide such an assessment, and there was none. So we didn't have like opportunities to work with others, and this is something that also we think is something that has to be put in mind. When it comes to the need of this data, or let's say other issues about the carbon footprint in our life cycle assessments, I can assure you that our members are already very much looking into it. So we are asking for recycled materials. We are asking for green steel, for example. We are also asking for green hydrogen. So because we are asking, we are already working on it. So there's also balancing schemes within the company which is using carbon footprint and put it in relations to revenue. So you can see that carbon footprint is a key player and will be even a bigger player in the next few years when it comes to the internal processes and the decision-making processes, actually. So we need this data also from the SMEs. Yeah.
Very good. Now I move to Maeva, and there was already a question before, to clarify where do you use the data, and I think you clarified that you use open source of information. So within these databases and open source information you use, where do you see, like, also on the social aspects, it doesn't have to be on the carbon footprint, where do you see big gaps, or you think that you don't find the data you're looking for and you think that progress needs to be made? Yeah. And how do you overcome this challenge as well from a methodological point of view? Yeah.
Well, for social LCA, if we use country-based data, well, it's rather difficult for some indicators that, of course, countries are not willing to share. For instance, well, child labor is the first one we will have in mind. And, well, as said, Carol, one of the criteria for data quality is time scope. And in fact, for many of these indicators, well, the timeliness is really bad. But it's also true if we look at LCA secondary data. For raw materials specifically, you can find secondary data that is 20 years old and still used. So this is one of the issues, is that there are some data, but quality is, well, not up to the level that we needed. But I want also to highlight is that, yes, there are many challenges, but this regulation and these rules are really improving, the way we will manufacture and use our products. So this, of course, we are highlighting here the challenges, and we won't find a solution today either. But that is great that we are discussing it, that we are working on it, that many of your partners are working on it, and that is something a positive message that I would like to hear today. And also I want to go back to what you said about, well, SMEs having issues to find people working on LCA. Well, I could see in many projects that we've been working on that when we, like 7, 8 years ago, well, many of the partners were not well, interested, involved in LCA, and well, we can see now that we are in a progress. We are seeing many more people interested, many people also working on the subject, and this is also improving. So of course we need to teach more engineers, mainly on LCA, and well, that's a bit of our job at the university, obviously. And we are also working on it, and obviously, well, it's not for February that we will have probably enough people working on this, but that's also a challenge that we identify is also, well, the manpower and, well, people that we teach on this subject.
So then, Carl, what is happening with the first requirement? Let's be a little bit realistic here. I mean, when it comes to the first carbon requirement, the declaration, do you see like really that the industry is really ready here, that we will have declarations that, you know, might have incomplete information, or you feel confident that maybe there will be, you know, we can step up and having be prepared at least to somehow fulfill these requirements?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, the companies are not sharing this data with us, our member companies, so I actually don't have any clue whether or not they will be able to fulfill this assessment. However, I know that they are already very hard preparing on it. People are working on it very, very hard, and I think that they will, of course, do this assessment. How complete it will be, I don't know, but they are purchasing secondary data like crazy. We will be using a lot, or there will be the usage a lot of secondary data for the supply chains. And that's also why we published this report on the CO2 footprint for nickel, for example. Because we wanted to make aware that there's not just like nickel per se, like nickel. It really depends on production paths, and we think we published it because we wanted also to be to get a benefit from being better than the mean. So we are very big fans of when you are doing some sustainable or you're buying green materials, that you also get a benefit out of it. And you only get a benefit out of it if there's an understanding that there's not just one footprint for a battery or just one footprint for nickel, for example. So we are working on it, and as I told you, the report that we published this already last year, so they are working on it for at least 3 years in the member companies. So they will come up with a solution, of course. How complete it may be, I really don't know. I cannot talk about that.
Just to follow up on this, I think one of the recommendations that was in Radi's presentation and in the SEPS Batro paper was about supply chain collaboration, which is used very often in these discussions. And you know, sometimes people ask, can you be a little bit more concrete? Because there is the Battery Alliance, there are initiatives. What kind of form of collaboration can we build? I don't know, Carl, if you think that the number of initiatives we have right now, because there's a lot also on the battery passport, and there's a German-led initiative, are sufficient in that regard, or whether you think there could be something, I don't know, something that could come even through initiatives like the G20, where you can have more of a global collaboration, because in the end, the carbon footprint requirements are going to affect global value chains. The same goes for due diligence requirements. I don't know if you see if you have any specific thought on how we can, you know, on what kind of supply chain initiatives we can have, or whether what we have in place is sufficient at this stage, and we don't need more than this. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned the battery passport. We think it's a very good way to find out the CO2 footprint on batteries, of course. However, we are, since it's just one part of an electric vehicle, we will have a production passport for traction motors as well, where we use the permanent magnets. It seems like we will also have a production passport for magnets. Then maybe we will have a production passport for something else. And then, of course, there will be a production passport for the whole car. So when we are thinking about all these passports, we also have to think about on how they communicate together so that we can put everything together in our system, which is the car, of course. And I think collaboration is key there, of course. I mentioned before, if we are responsible for it, we also should have influence on it, of course, but we also are big fans of shared responsibility. And therefore, collaboration is a way on how to share responsibility within the value chain. And I mentioned Catena X, of course, on how we can share this data. I don't think that Catena X of course, will not replace the battery passport, because battery passport is a better way when it comes to battery. But of course, we can implement the battery passport in Catena X, for example, and then we can share this information. Yeah.
Before I move to this part of the part, is there any question from the audience? All right. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So hi everyone, this is Johnson from Fort Otosan and one of the Betro partners, and we are studying the Turkish battery recycling in the project. So we here talked about like difficulties, basically like complex process or difficulty collecting all the data, collaboration, and so what's your expectation from LCA being autonomous then? Because I think we need action. I think the data is the easy part, seems to be. Collecting is hard. So yesterday morning I was in a meeting in ASEA and they were like talking about pushing a technology over people, so they just didn't want to accept, and market like almost crashing at the moment for the EV market. So like some companies are going bankruptcy, like big companies as we know. So is it gonna be something like that for the LCA as well, maybe? Well, so what's your expectation? Thank you.
Yeah, valid. I mean, we haven't brought forward the whole environment right now in Europe, which is not necessarily the ideal for the industry. And yeah, I think that's something that I don't know who wants to come in on this. Is there any other question? Or okay, maybe we take one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to raise a point about the social acceptance of the value chain, batteries value chain, because yesterday at the main event they were talking about that maybe it's the last and right time to make Europeans accept that mining is necessary for the green transition. And as you talked a lot about the life cycle scope of the battery, I would like to ask the speakers if some of them have a perspective on the social acceptance of the old battery value chain in Europe.
You mean whether the value chain is ready to accept these requirements in a way? Yeah.
Social acceptance in the maybe more in the terms of the acceptance of the social communities, of the necessity to build a value chain in-house in Europe for batteries.
Good. I don't know, Emily, if you want to start with the social acceptance, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good question and something that's being discussed a lot this week with Raw Materials Week. So I think, as TNE, we feel strongly that we do need, to invest in the whole battery value chain in Europe, so from mining through to manufacturing, recycling. But of course, when it comes to mining in Europe, we need to be doing that, working with local communities, with their engagement, with their consent, and we think there's a number of ways that we can do that. So I think, we do have on a number of areas already good legislation and protection in place. But something as TNEs we would like to see is for the European Commission to update the EU Extractive Waste Directive, so EU rules governing mining waste specifically in the EU, so that, given that we are seeing new mines opening, based on the benchmarks set out for domestic mining in the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, we think this is a way that could actually reassure local communities and ensure that we're using the best and safest available techniques for managing the waste from mines here in Europe. Just as one example of how we can, address the question and work with local communities to make sure that we're mining in the most sustainable way and a way that respects local people.
My answers to your question with regards to kind of autonomous and the difficulty in collecting data, I think there's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of preparation from companies on how to calculate and gather the data, but the business of creating kind of this carbon footprint calculation market is not really, or it has, is it existing right now, or is definitely under preparation, but it's not being very well communicated. So
to help SMEs if there is like a LCA companies where they have like a tool that you, or a software that you can kind of download, and then you can just put the inputs in, it does your calculation for you. I'm sure this will be a market that will be emerging, but as of yet, it's not communicated very well. And I guess time will tell us when and if these companies will be popping up and marketing what they can offer to not just SMEs, but larger organizations as well, to help simplify and make it very much easier to calculate the carbon footprint.
Yeah, when it comes to the social acceptance, yeah, I agree with Emily. We think that, at least, let me phrase it differently. So one of our de-risking approaches when it comes to geopolitical risks that we are looking at right now, and maybe will be a little bit bigger next year or the next 4 years, localizing our value chains is key. So this is the approach that we are looking into. We want to localize our value chains also for the European Union, and therefore we think that mining and battery production, of course, has to have a key role also in the European Union. And especially when it comes to raw materials, we have a very good set of regulations on how we think that sustainable mining should be done, but we don't do mining. And this is a very hard case then to go outside the European Union, ask for raw materials, but you have to do it our way, but we don't do it our way. So it's very, very good if we could be like a lighthouse, or have some lighthouse projects where we can show within the European Union that it is economically viable to do mining also in the European Union and fulfill high sustainable requirements that we also have in our value chains, and therefore go out and show the world that basically we can do it and you should be able to do it as well. So how we look into waste, for example, is very key also for our value chains. When it comes to the acceptance, I understand. We've been talking with Euromines, Eurometaux, and so on. They all told us that we don't have a NIMBY problem when it comes to mining in the European Union. We have a banana problem, which stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And this is, of course, not good. We think that this is a responsibility not only from our side, from the automotive industry. We know we have a responsibility to be transparent in this issue. So that's why we also want to, figure out the CO2 footprints, and with the battery passport on where the raw materials are coming from and what risks maybe they are associated. Everybody can have a look in this then, of course. But we think that the mining companies, of course, have to be a lot more transparent than they have been in the last 20 years. Mining was declining the last 20 years in the European Union. Now it should be rising. And of course, it's not just the case for mining companies to go somewhere and say, we give you jobs, and that's basically it. There's not more information. At least 20 years ago, there was not more information coming from those mining companies. This is now changing, which is very good. They are showing or showcasing what they are doing to be to make the impact on the environment as low as possible. And if people don't agree, they can raise their voices and then make the companies react to it 100%. So this is a key issue, which we think also policymakers should a bigger case of it. So they also have to put maybe some rules for information out there, especially for mining, and then gaining those social acceptance by the people living in the European Union or near those production plants.
Very good. I have one last question. Maybe I start with Maeva, but maybe Fabrice has something to share on this as well. And it comes down to, again, to partnerships, but more in the cluster in the context of European Union projects, because there's a lot of European Union funded projects now on batteries, some of them doing LCAs or social life cycle assessments. You had the list of projects in your slides. In Batro, we have a specific task on this, and I was wondering whether there's a need somehow to better consolidate all of this data, whether there can be some kind of initiative on this. I know there's the cluster event on Thursday that we're going to participate as well, but sometimes I'm wondering if all of this information that we need right now, and some of it is being carried out in European Union projects, needs to be better streamlined, outlined, in the public, or maybe there can be some initiative also from the European Commission side. I don't know, any thoughts on this, and then I turn to Fabrice and we close. Yeah.
Yes, indeed, there are many European projects on batteries and that do LCA and even social LCA, and they gather data which may be confidential. So then the next step may be difficult, of course, to share them. But we are part in another project and another cluster, and we are having an LCA cluster. to see how also can we harmonize our work in all those projects. But the main issue in those data that we collect is that it may be confidential. But when it's not, I haven't seen projects really sharing inventories, which we should be incentivized more, I guess, to be able to build, well, probably more inventories out there. Because I've seen also databases that are meant for batteries that I don't see many people that are really falling. So maybe there are some incentive that should be, well, for those projects, we should have requirements of sharing data when it's not confidential, which is often, of course.
Just out of clarification, what happens if there's a peer-reviewed publication out of it? Because usually you need to share the data, right? Or sometimes.
Yeah, well, you're not fully obliged to, of course, and it depends on the journal, and it depends on, well, you can write an open publication without sharing openly the data behind, which is another issue, which is more linked to research, let's say.
All right, good. Fabrice, any thoughts on this?
Yes, a few thoughts. Thank you for the question. So, first of all, should Horizon Europe project publish data? I would say yes, please publish data. So we are not writing the calls with RTD, but sometimes it's required to publish some data, but maybe we don't go that far. We should probably go that far. I think the lifecycle data network is there for that as well. It provides an infrastructure, some clear guidelines on the data, and I think for projects promoters, publishing at the end a data set is a good proof of quality. No, you develop a process, you develop a data set, and we can still retrieve data sets from scientific publications. We are doing that at the moment on hydrogen, but it would be easier if project could publish. So please do that if possible. And it requires a bit time on ensuring quality, but I think it's a good output, good show of the quality. If I may, I've got two last points. I'd like to come back to the previous interventions. I'd like to resolve the two questions. You were asking about questioning the difficulties on carbon footprint, etc. We are here discussing the details. We all know the devil is in the details. But let's remember as well that this battery regulation was made for that, actually. Before, it was a battery waste directive addressing collection and recovery. Sorry to be a bit simple, but that was it in 2006. Now we've got, the Commission knew that the battery, e-mobility would pick up. So we need to gain social acceptance of this technology. So that's why they have proposed, that was really to support that, the social acceptance, the carbon footprint, because what is sustainable batteries? They are carbon footprint performing, they are circular, and they are considering social aspects as well. So of course, due diligence is still there, a bit qualitative at the moment, but it's there. So that was exactly for that we are asking to declare some performance, is to gain the trust of the people. No? So that was for the social acceptance. I'd like to come back to Cara as well. I mean, again, let's recognize the battery regulation was the first of a kind. That's why we are all watching it, and we are all waiting for the delegated act. And now it's not a model, but it created a lot of attraction. No? There are some proposals on PV panels, maybe. We are talking about steel, but not yet regulating steel. Vehicles, there we speak about recycled content, but not carbon footprint for the moment. It's not written there, and no plan. So yes, let's. And very important, Critical Matter Act that was mentioned. So of course, we will need mining in the EU if we want to take our role in this transition. And the Article 31 of the Critical Matter Act asks to also declare the environmental performance of critical materials. Again, the work is only starting, but yeah, that's it. The whole value chain needs to move, and so I would like to be a bit positive on that as well. And I'd like to challenge our academic partner. You say, Maeva, that we need to go beyond carbon footprint. So based on what you saw, so what is the next parameters on the environmental side? Is it eutrophication, as you show? Or which next parameters is ready for in terms of comparability, data quality, acceptance, etc.? On the environmental side and social, I don't know whether there is one of the social aspects of socialism here that is more mature than others in terms of acceptability, data quality, etc.
I could even go a bit beyond that. Even carbon footprint, we are still discussing it because, of course, we are assessing batteries produced today that will be recycled tomorrow and even maybe have a second life even later. And then the global warming potential of gases that are emitted today are not the potential that are emitted in 10 or 20 years. So even for carbon footprint, we still have discussion on academic point of view. But there are quite some indicators that we know are more reliable than others. It doesn't mean that we should not use all of them. Because even though we assess, for instance, human toxicity or ecotoxicity, which we know have a lower level of certainty because there are many, many substances that have toxicity effects. And then you have mix, and so there is a lot there is less certainty of these indicators. Ignoring them doesn't mean that we gain more certainty. We just ignore them, so we lose information. So we should not forget those indicators that we know are a bit less certain. For me, the PEF and all the indicators are necessary to include, because, well, we give, we can even go beyond and have other indicators, but here we can already have 3 areas of protection that are, so human health and biodiversity and resources, which we need to tackle today.
Excellent. I think it's time for a closure, so I would like really to thank all of you for coming today and our distinguished speakers. Yeah. I think, this was quite an information-rich event. You don't usually, sometimes in events in Brussels, you stick to the high-level points, but I think here we went into a lot of technical issues that will concern the industry and broader stakeholders in town. I might go back to the recording myself, actually, to recap on some of the messages. Keep in mind, I saw some people taking pictures that we will upload all presentations on the webpage of the event, maybe tomorrow, so you can have this in record if you need. And yeah, hope we can do something similar in the future. That was great. And now there's time to continue this discussion, maybe the debate on which indicators we should use in the future during lunch below. Okay, thank you. And to remind to check batro.eu, and there will be more things coming in next year, including the results of